Let's continue our discussion on creating a histogram using Microsoft Excel. At this point, we've created our group frequency distribution and made our first attempt at generating a histogram. Except the histogram generated doesn't quite look like the histogram that we were expecting. These vertical columns aren't adjacent to each other, right? There's a gap between them. So one of the things that we did is eliminated the gap and made it so that you could distinguish them from each other. The next thing we needed to do was clean up the axes and labels for that matter. So, in order to clean up these axes so that the numbers appear beneath each axis, I'm going to highlight now one of the numbers here so that it creates a highlight of the entire number set of upper class boundaries and these anchors. And then I'm going to right click and select Format Axis. Let me show that again. I'm going to right click and Format Axis. Now, in the dialog that appears, I'm going to select this drop down for Axis Labels. And instead of labeling this axis with the lower class boundaries the way it's being presented here, I'm just going to select None. And notice it gets rid of all the labels. The reason why is because trying to format now these axes so that the numbers will automatically appear below the hash marks is very tough to do in Excel. And a lot of times when you try to get it to do what you want, you've wasted a ton of time. It's easier just to do smoke and mirrors. And let me demonstrate what I mean by that. I'm going to give myself some space here, but I'm going to delete this label here, bin. Because what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about, for the horizontal axis, the upper class boundaries of the classes representing the amount of strontium-90 in the deciduous teeth of Pennsylvania residents. So let's label, first of all, what the values we're going to put here represent. So I'm going to select text box from Insert and Text Box, and then I'm just going to click somewhere below my hash marks. And what that will do is, it'll create an input box to type in text. So we're talking about the amount of strontium, 90, and I'm going to include the units of measures, millibecquerels in deciduous teeth of Pennsylvania children. Boy, I hope I got that right. Yeah. And now that's the label for the horizontal axis. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this frequency. Frequency is actually fine because, yeah, whatever we write here for the class boundaries, this represents the number of children with that amount of strontium-90 in their teeth. But let's actually label it that way then. So what I do is I click on this bar, double click somewhere on the text so it highlights the text, and then I just retype it. Number of children. And maybe resize it so you can see it. Oh well, it's not going to let me. Next, I'm going to label now these hash marks. And as I mentioned before, it's all smoke and mirrors. I'm just going to select text box again. I'm going to click it near this first hash mark, and I'm going to start labeling the upper and lower class boundaries. 109.5 was my first lower class boundary, and then all of the upper class boundaries. 119.5, 129.5, 139.5, 149.5, 159.5, 169.5, 179.5, 189.5. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust the spacing of these numbers manually so that they match up with the hash marks on the graph. As follows. So 109.5, that's where the first one starts. 109.5 looks like it's right there. I'm going to move this over a little bit. Same with 139.5. It looks like we're doing pretty well here. 169, 179, and there we go. And voila. Actually, that looks a little better, right? Like this maybe. There we go. Oh, I'm going to delete this label here for frequency. Oop. Just for the frequency. And now we're almost done. What's left though is we'll want a more descriptive title, so I'm just going to highlight and double click histogram and retype a title. Study of strontium 90 for Pennsylvania children. Right, just something descriptive that someone can get the idea of what's being discussed in the graph without having to read too much into it. And then the last component of every graph that you shouldn't forget about is to include a reference to the source of your data. If you don't reference the source of your data, then your graphs lose a little bit of credibility, because if there's no reference to the source of the data, then you might be questioned as to the validity of the data. In other words, someone might say that you just made it up just to create this graph that maybe furthers your agenda or some sort of self-interest. So we're going to type in here the source of the data. And you might remember from the textbook, the source of the data was what? It was this article, An Unexpected Rise of Strontium-90 in the U.S. Deciduous Teeth in the 1990s, by Mangano et al., Science of the Total Environment. And that's exactly how we're going to type it in our graph. So I come back to Excel, and I'm going to retype that whole thing. So I'm trying to get it here. All right, here we go. And let me type it correctly. An unexpected rise in strontium 90 in the deciduous, and you can see that my text is starting to bleed over, so I'm going to have to do some real quick formatting here so I can see what the heck I'm doing. All right, deciduous. Ooh, did I get that right down here? Deciduous. In the U.S. deciduous. Ah, there we go. Just in this U.S. deciduous teeth in the 1990s. By Mangano et al. Science. Lots of typos with my typing here of the total environment. Right. And of course, yeah, you can pretty it up a little bit more just so it doesn't look completely right. Amount of strontium-90 millibecquerels in deciduous teeth of, say, U.S. children. There we go. Maybe we'll want it to make it so it looks similar to this label here, number of children. We'll make sure it's the right kind of text. So we're going to make that 9, and we're going to bold that sucker. Yeah. And this would be what we would consider a complete graph. Well, let's change this reference as well from Pennsylvania to U.S. children. Yeah. And there we go. The components of the graph that you need to verify are on your graph. Title. You got to have a title. Without the title, then you're making people work too hard for something that's supposed to be worth 1,000 words. Next, the source of your data. You can't omit that. You got to have that on there. You want to make sure your axes are labeled. Here, this represents frequency. These are the upper class boundaries, including one lower class boundary. So you want to make sure that the axes are labeled. You have an appropriate scale, right? So there are labels actually. These are our scales. And then you'll want to make sure that it looks like a histogram, that you have vertical columns of equal width that extend up to a height that corresponds to the corresponding frequency for each class, or we could use relative frequency. And that's how we create this nice histogram. Now, one thing I wanted to mention in parting is this. Microsoft Excel is real awesome because you get these types of tools, you can create these wonderful looking graphs, but please resist with everything in your being from doing anything really just nonsensical, right? We're college students. There's no need to embellish your graph with anything beyond what we're trying to communicate to our audience. This is a nice, clean graph. Don't do anything to embellish the graph with pretty pictures or designs or even this. Consider this. Microsoft Excel, as I was saying, you could come over here and say, you know what, I'd like to change the way my graph looks. So maybe I want a different color. And that's fine. Actually, you know, a different color won't be too bad. However, you know, you'll want to make sure that your columns are visible, right? Be careful about accessibility, you know, standards with regards to people with color blindness as well. Use a color scheme that's appropriate for people that are colorblind. Another thing is this. Don't get too cute with the types of graphs you use, right? Here, you're just like, well, you know, we just choose a different color. Okay, fine. What you don't want to do, though, is get too fancy about it, right? As I said before, Excel gives you a lot of quick options for doing things for your graphs very quickly to embellish them. Now look, here we're making the columns look three-dimensional. Isn't that pretty? Or for that matter, you may, you know, decide, hey, you know what, instead of these flat columns, even more, maybe I'll do something like this. No, please don't do this, right? The reason why is because when you're dealing with these graphs, let me change this, that's pretty ugly too. The purpose of this histogram is to be able to contrast the number of data values in each of the classes. And you can do that very quickly here. And so the only thing you're really contrasting is the height of these vertical bars. It's a one-dimensional change because you're only contrasting one dimension of the graph, the heights. When you do something foolish like this, you know, here, like something like this, now you've created a two-dimensional image. And sometimes by doing that, now you're representing something three-dimensionally that's only being, you know, contrasted one-dimensionally in terms of heights. Plus, it's just busy. It looks pretty, and elementary school kids will enjoy it, but we're not elementary school kids. So please don't embellish your graph with nonsense. This is clean. You'll get a lot more respect from your peers and your boss and your contemporaries using this than something that's wholly embellished. Thank you.